All right. I guess I will start off. Hello, everyone. I am Chris. And so we'll start off with what is academic freedom? I am the Dean of Business and Manufacturing at CCD here in Colorado. And I guess we'll just introduce ourselves as we go through our little sections. I think that's probably the easiest way to do it. Probably most effective. And feel free to ask questions in chat as you have them, or you can also shout out as well. We are equal opportunity answerers, I guess is what we will say. So go ahead, type in if you want to. Someone says the beta might exist. Feel free to say, what is academic freedom to you? No, that's totally fine. So feel free to type in what are your thoughts on academic freedom? What is it?
People don't want to commit.
I know it's too early. Everyone's like, it's too early.
It's
I'm
new.
munching. I'm eating.
Okay.
Still finishing up my brown bag from the design workshop because you guys made me work instead of letting me eat while I watched. So
Okay, we have an answer.
there we go. We have being able to engage freely in academic discourse. Yes. So one of the things about academic freedom is there's lots of different definitions. People have lots of different interpretations of what academic freedom is, and what it's called is heteroglossia. What it means is simply words have lots of different meanings. It all depends on context. It all depends on the time that you're doing it, and so there's variation. So what you see here is this little S graph, and the thinner it is, the more narrower the group consensus is of what a word means. The fatter the curve is, the more broadly that definition is. So that's really sort of a new term for everybody, heteroglossia. That basically means when a word means lots of different things to different people. And so academic freedom is one of those things. And the reason for that is because we have to parse things out, because academic freedom is one of those things that can mean a lot of things. So first and foremost, freedom of expression, First Amendment right here in the US. A lot of times when we're talking about academic freedom, we're actually talking about those that are invoking academic freedom. They're actually talking about freedom of expression and not necessarily about academic freedom. So that's the first thing that we always have to listen for and think about as an administrator. That's one of the first things I always listen for whenever I have conversations about when there's any sort of conflict about academic freedom is it actually academic freedom, or is it freedom of expression? Next thing is, if you're at a private institution, academic freedom is different because you may have restrictions on both your freedom of expression and your academic freedom as a term of your employment. So that is disclosed to you upon your hiring, and you typically are signing a form that acknowledges that you have had that explained to you. And then also, if you're in a union mediated environment, so if you're part of a union, your union has negotiated certain parts of your interactions on your behalf, and that typically also is laid out for you in your union contract and bylaws. So those are all things that modify, intertwine, and show up when we talk about academic freedom. It gets mixed in because sometimes we talk about academic freedom, but the reality is it may be a union mediated piece. It may be a First Amendment right. It may be something else beyond academic freedom. If you find this really interesting, there's a very light read that's out there. It is the Law of Higher Education. This is the 5th version. It is, like I said, it is a light read. Academic freedom is devoted an entire chapter in this book, and it's really fun and interesting. So this is one of those areas that you could definitely get some good background in it as something that's there. So this was established, the basis and the foundation of academic freedom was basically established through the court. And it was through a series of court cases to the US Supreme Court in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. So for all of you out there, what else was going on in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s? I know those were very quiet decades in the history of the world. So go feel free for some audience participation. What other historical events might have been occurring during the 40s, 50s, and 60s?
It looks like we don't have history faculty.
We don't have history faculty here. I thought we'd at least have some history faculty here. There's some creative uses of Jello.
Jello as a food group was
Jell-O as a food
established during
group,
that
yes.
time period. That and Kool-Aid, right?
Oh no. Apparently people haven't watched movies. No one's watched Oppenheimer, apparently. I guess we had the crowd that only went and watched Barbie. They didn't watch Oppenheimer. So so in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, you had the World Wars. You had the World Wars. You had the start of the Civil Rights. You had start of the Cold War. You had lots of things going on during this period of time. And really, these are some of the key seminal rulings that happened where you had state different actors trying to restrict what faculty were allowed to research, were allowed to talk about, what ideas and ideologies they were allowed to discuss in their classes. And so some of the really interesting pieces, yes, here in the US, this is all very US centric view of academic freedom. Yeah, I will. I'm sorry, I forgot to disclose that positionality. Yes, this is all academic freedom in the context of the United States. Teachers and students must always remain free to inquire, to study, to evaluate, to gain new maturity and understanding. Otherwise, our civilization will stagnate. The four essential freedoms of a university to determine for itself on academic grounds who may teach, what may be taught, how it shall be taught, and who may be admitted. And that was Sweezy versus New Hampshire, and Shelton Tucker and Griswold versus Connecticut. You ended up with the state cannot restrict faculty freedom of speech, freedom of inquiry, freedom of affiliation, or contract the spectrum of available knowledge. So these are all fundamental findings through Supreme Court pieces. Typically what folks are going to refer everyone to is the AAUP's definition of academic freedom, which is the freedom to research on any topic you desire. The freedom to choose, create content in your course, as long as it's relevant to your course outcomes. Evaluate student work and assign grades. Decide how you teach. And in employment perspectives, you have due process as a faculty member, and that you have a grievance channel. And then the other piece is that you have speech protections as long as you're talking about things in your field of expertise. So, like, that's one of the things that here, all this is mediated by your field of expertise and those learning outcomes. So, like, if you're in a class, let's say if I'm in an accounting class and I'm talking about something other than let's say I'm talking about art, and it has nothing to do with art, the appreciation from an accounting standpoint, or depreciation of art, or the valuation of art, then I am not necessarily talking about it from my expertise as an accountant. So those are things that we're talking about where it's keeping, when you're talking about things inside your class, you're to keep on topic. Now, there is that process there, and I'm sure folks here are creative enough that our faculty can always justify can always have that argument about how this connects to what. We've all played 5 Degrees with Kevin Bacon. So you can also have lots of fun there of talking about how this relates back to your topic. But there has to be reason why you're talking about things in the course. So there has to be a teaching reason. There has to be a tied to, yes, it has to be interdisciplinary, it could be transdisciplinary. There has to be a reason for the topics that you're there. If you are outside of your topic, then you are running the risk of falling outside of academic freedom. Like I said, this is a mediated environment. So we call it shared governance. And so this is governance between the faculty and college administration. And college administrators, they set how faculty will be evaluated. They handle due process for student appeals. That's the other piece about it. With student appeals, the faculty set the grades. What's interesting about it is the grade itself is not an appealable issue. What's appealable is, was there a mistake how the points were added up? Is there bias in how the grade was assigned? Was there a mistake in how stuff was calculated? Was there a technical issue whenever there was trying to work? So usually whenever there's an appeals process, that's really sort of what we're looking at from there. So your appeals committee usually outlines what is an appealable aspect of a grade and what is not. Another piece is we also, administrators also can set professional development, set personal improvement plans, and then also administrators are responsible for providing administrative and programmatic oversight to ensure alignment with accreditation, state, federal standards, procedures, and policies. And this is all a shared governance with faculty and administrators, ensuring that everyone is aligned.
We have a question, Chris.
Yes.
With this definition in mind, does this mean that students who are early in their education cannot engage in academic freedom, but may still have some freedom of expression protections?
For when it comes to students, it depends on the activity. So I guess my question to them would be, what are they engaging in? And when it comes from a research perspective, yes, even if they're early in their career, if they're enrolled in the university, if they're enrolled, they are a student. And if they're doing research, then that would give them academic freedom. But it depends on what they're engaging in. What is the activity? So it would be the activity in the environment would be the ones that would probably would be the factors that come into play. So if they're in the classroom and they're engaging in research or they're engaging in a discussion about a topic, is the topic they're discussing about, number one, does it apply to the class that they're talking about or the research that they're doing for the basis of that class? If they're in a public forum, if they're talking about whatever they're doing, like on in the public square or at the student union, that's probably more of a freedom of expression protection. Like I said, it just depends on location and what they're actually engaging in. So that would be your mitigating factors with that piece. It is a milieu of stuff.
Okay, so I'll take over this next part. Now, the slide that I'm showing you, this is based off a doctoral course that I took in leadership in educational equity. I'm Kay Novak. I'm a learning designer. When talking about academic freedom, it's usually, how do learning designers think about academic freedom, and how is academic freedom brought up to learning designers? But for the purposes of this is what I found useful from my doctoral program. Now, if you Google education philosophies, you'll usually see like 6. But I loved how my professor framed this as the 3 super education philosophies for supervisors, okay? And since I do online learning, I see this. I see that some schools have a viewpoint, have a certain viewpoint about education, and other schools have different viewpoints about education. I see this in learning design teams. I see learning design teams that I can say, oh yeah, they're essentialists. There's no question. That learning design team, that learning design shop, they're essentialists. You know, they have their SMEs. they have their practices. Everything is systemized. Very little student input. there's no real place for a faculty or an instructor to get feedback from a student to be able to change things, between the spring semester and the summer semester. So these three educational philosophies, the reason I bring them out is, one, know what your institution is like. Is your institution like an essentialism one? Now, we were having some discussions in the different sessions, like, maybe like if the students are going to school for precision welding, you do want a supervisor teaching them exactly what needs to happen. Okay? If they're going for English composition, maybe you want more creativity. So what I'm saying is know how your school thinks about it, your institution thinks about it. Know the faculty that you are working with, how they think about it, what is their education philosophy, and then also know about the learning designers. What is the learning designer's educational philosophy? I am not an essentialist. If you work on a learning design project with me, you are pretty much going to end up in existentialism, where there's a commitment to individual teacher choice. And the thing about it is, I would love to call myself an experimentalist, but a lot of times as a learning designer, we don't have the staff to be able to go back and help people continue to change things and tweak things before every semester. But the way that I approach it is the existentialism. And the reason I'm bringing this into academic freedom, is because your learning designer might have a different view than you, if you're faculty, or if you are the learning designer, your faculty might have a different view, and it helps to know where people are coming from, to know what kind of approach can be taken when it comes to learning design. And Chris, next slide. And we've discussed this in a couple of our sessions already, and this will be coming up again. Design justice. Design justice is normative. A faculty member might be coming into a learning design situation, who looks at norms, goals, and standards of education. Okay, this sounds very much like an administrator, like Chris was talking about, but your learning designer or your faculty member might have design justice and inclusiveness and accessibility as the norm, goal, or the standards that they want to have in their course. These things, knowing these things about the people that you are working with and knowing how your institution looks at this will help you, at least in my opinion, formulate a learning design plan. Now, for example, if you go to the next one, like Chris, if you go to the next slide, for example, I will, in learning and in classes, whenever I can bring this up, I will bring this up, that Denver Public Library has this awesome collection on the origin of the disability rights movement that happened in Denver. I bring that up all the time. That's something that you can accept. That's a norm from design justice that you can expect me to bring up, that when things are going through, I will pull something like this up and go, hey, would you like to use this? Next slide, Chris. And then also as learning designers, as we're talking about academic freedom, and as we're talking about things that help with learning design, I will tell you, as learning designers for the Adult Learning and Design Academy, we found that the existentialism, giving faculty so many choices, ended up with them not making any decisions. So we, we did a play on a Tex-Mex menu, and we came up with a menu so that the faculty can pick and choose, so we know how to help them within the time. We're not trying to constrict what choices they have, but we found we had to have a menu. Ordering off the menu did not work very well for them. So, with that, we'll come back here, and I'm just reinforcing this, that when it comes to learning design, and also academic freedom, and how you're going to work with your faculty, or your faculty work with your learning designers, it's not bad to have an idea of where the person you're working with is coming from. What philosophy will they have, so that you can know how to talk to them about it. And that's just my part in this presentation. And then we'll go over to Dolly.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Dolly Rosenbrook. I'm the chair for our Business for Creative Industries Bachelor's program at Front Range Community College. And I'm sure we've all kind of felt maybe, you know, we can kind of relate to this cartoon here. I just wanted to share. And so, you know, it's just like the different kind of cycles of academic freedom as from a student point, or as we've kind of heard in our career as a professor, and really just kind of, you know, just the different perspectives. So as Chris said, it's really about, you know, and as Kay said, just knowing what point our faculty are at in this journey. And so that way we can best prepare to assist them in their curriculum development. Chris, next slide, please. Okay, so what are the pros of academic freedom and curriculum design? So we'll go over a couple of pros, and then we'll look at the cons. So one of the most common ones that we think about is just the agency of the faculty member to teach the material that they believe is important and relevant to the course itself. And it also allows for discussion. You can insert timely examples and really engage the student around ideas that may be controversial. And then just really, you know, it allows the professor to share their subject matter expert or SME role, and then just making sure that we always have innovation, right? And that we're trying new techniques in teaching. And next is the cons. So the cons of academic freedom and curriculum design. So it could lead to an unbalanced course content. For example, I see this with a lot of our career and technical education courses, where in those situations, we oftentimes are really leaning heavily on industry instructors that are engaged in industry. And so they may not have that curriculum design background. And so what they may deem as an assignment that would assess certain competencies may not be the same as what a faculty who's experienced in season may select an assignment or deliver for competency. So it also allows for biases to come into play. So that individual professor's own personal biases and their beliefs around what might be the best approach to teaching in that particular course. And then as well as inconsistencies. So if one instructor is using one method of assessment or one deliverable to assess course understanding from another, then how do we know that the student is learning what they need to as far as and mastering those course competencies? And then also just a total bypass of curriculum oversight processes. And how do we keep course quality in check? Okay, next slide. So there's two ends of the spectrum, okay? There's the institutions where there's little oversight on and little restraint on academic freedom. And it's a faculty-centered approach where the faculty can pretty much develop the entire curriculum and the presentation of the curriculum within the learning management system. And so then there's the other end of the spectrum where We have a whole learning design team, and we engage stakeholders, and it's a very collaborative approach to curriculum design with multiple voices being brought to the table. And in that environment, we're really centering the student and the student's needs and their education goals. So really, we need to kind of find balance. Basically, it's, you know, it's kind of going back to that example. There's some instructors who are very versed in industry and the current ongoing industry in this areas that they're just experts. They don't know the curriculum design method or how to present that information. And then there's also the issue of consistency in course design. If we don't provide students with consistency, then there's obstacles in place that the student may not be able to navigate the content or understand the presentation of the information. So the next slide. So this is where we're at. Okay, so we need to have a balance that ensures both academic freedom, but also supports the student centered needs. Okay, so I give a scenario here. HLCs are an accredited institution. And basically what they've kind of determined is that there's a lot of faculty that lack online training, online expertise. And so while they may be very versed in their subject, they may not have the experience in presenting the information in a way that's easy for the student to navigate, that has common nomenclature, that has terminology that students are understanding. And so that consistency across an entire institution is really important for the students' understanding. And so there are some things that we can standardize without meaningful loss in academic freedom, such as like the course design templates or syllabi templates. I'm going to relate this to the Colorado Online Consortia project that I've been engaged with as a member of the Colorado Learning Design Subcommittee. We, as a subcommittee, there was about, I say, around 15 members, including faculty, administrators, learning designers. We all looked at what was existing across the state and the Colorado Community College system as far as our learning management template or the similarities. So how can we really promote the similarities amongst all 13 institutions to ensure the student experience is similar and consistent and cohesive? So we also can do that through the syllabi. Okay, so the great university opportunity for building in consistencies and guardrails to ensure that a student in one course that is the same section as another is being graded and assessed in a similar manner. And prior learning assessment is another area of this. How do we know that one faculty member at an institution is assessing prior learning in the same manner as one at another institution? Common course learning objectives are something that we use in CCCS to ensure that the courses are teaching to the learning outcomes in a consistent manner, which ensures transferability of courses from one institution to another. And just really, making sure that we're engaging stakeholders in a collaborative curriculum development process. Okay, so so Colorado Online, we, as the Learning Design Subcommittee, had several charges. So we did identify a shared course framework within our learning management system. And what I'm talking about there is just whenever a student logs into the LMS, they're faced with the same navigation. They aren't having to understand how to navigate through a particular institution's framework, because they're familiar with it. So that's welcoming to the students. That's very student-centric. Identifying like the common course design elements. And making sure that we have accessibility built in. That's been one of our focuses. We came up with like a healthy course checklist to allow faculty a means of really making sure that they have everything and that it's set up properly. And then the other way is that we came up with this Learning Design Academy, which is really collaborative, bringing together statewide discipline groups to ensure the course quality and that the instructional materials there are based upon those course learning outcomes. And then the syllabus tool. So we're moving towards a simple syllabus management tool, which will allow each institution to make some customizations as far as the information that's made. There is also system-wide information. But that was a student-driven request for there to be some sort of cohesive document that shows the common flow of information being presented in the syllabi. And I'll turn it back to Kay.
Okay. Anybody have any examples of academic freedom issues?
So I see in the, oh, that was Chris actually talking about the pressure to maintain currency in curriculum. You know, I kind of can go into an example on the CTE side, and you know, just really it actually has to do with rigor. You know, a lot of our instructors are sometimes a little bit hesitant to change content that may be in a ready to teach course shell that's provided to them, just because they don't want to off balance the rigor. Or the other end of the spectrum is that they do change it and it does off balance the rigor. And so maybe an instructor feels that a student needs to do you know, a magazine design. So my background is in graphic design, for example. If I were to ask my class to do a magazine design, and then in the other section of the same class, they were just doing a cover and maybe one article, is there a difference in the competency that's being assessed, or is that just off balancing the rigor? And is that, you know, is that my academic freedom as a faculty or instructor to make that edit? Do I need to check in with someone? And is that fair to the student as far as like the workload goes? You know, there's lots of kind of questions there as far as, and then if a student comes to me and asks for prior learning, in my class, I'm asking them to create a whole magazine, but they go to another instructor for a prior learning assessment, and they're just being asked to share a cover design. How do we balance out assessment, rigor, and alignment with competencies? How far do we take that? Lots to think about.
Yeah, I typed in the chat. Most of my conflicts when it comes to academic freedom, I don't call them conflicts, but when when the issues and concerns arise, is usually around grade appeals, as you'd expect.
Yeah.
Always they pop up. We call them grade appeals, but it's probably more classroom management. I think would probably be a better classification of those type of issues. And what I mean by that would be like when there is a student requesting an extension that isn't granted, and then they look to escalate it up the chain. And then also discussions on student success. So talking about how classroom management styles are affecting student success, especially when we start looking at like everyone's looking at our equity work right now. We're looking at the disaggregating our data. We're looking at what are we doing in the classroom and how is it affecting different groups of students. And we're trying to figure out, we're just asking questions like why are certain groups of students succeeding at certain rates and why others aren't. And so we're just sort of looking at and asking ourselves those questions and what can we do differently to make sure we're getting the support to the students that need it and trying to figure that out. And that's, some of that is brushing into, well, this is how I run my class, this is how I've always run my class. And it's talking about it and providing that data, and then giving them use cases, talking about bringing in peers and having peers say, well, this is how I do it. There's a lot of discussions about how do we norm as a discipline. Like, how do we come in, bring everybody in business, or bring everybody in a certain discipline, and say, well, how do you approach like assignment 1? How do you approach assignment 2? How do you approach the midterm when it comes to how are you grading, to sort of try to get away from that trope of this is an easy grader versus a hard grader versus, that you have that natural variation of how different faculty will grade for certain things. How can we create a common rubric? I think that's another way that folks can, we've had success at other institutions where we got groups together to create a common framework, a common rubric for grading the key assessments in the course, especially for if we have big projects, and getting everyone to make sure that they're looking and evaluating things at the same way, so that way students are getting consistency. Because students do talk, like students will talk and say, this professor graded me super hard on this one didn't. And then you start getting reputations, whether they're just based on student perceptions.
And I'll jump in a little here as a learning designer. As a learning designer, I think sometimes we overthink this.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we can't help it. As learning designers, we're running like 50 different scenarios in our head a lot of times. And having one encounter with a faculty at one time, and we're still running that same scenario for the next 5 years. What I'm saying, I think from a learning design viewpoint, don't assume that what you're suggesting is going to impinge on their academic freedom. It can be design, a lot of times it's design choices and colors, and whether or not they're putting a table in their announcement. Okay. I think that sometimes we as learning designers overthink academic freedom. We don't hear that as an issue that often. I know when we do hear it, it stays with us. Yes, design and content are different. Excellent way to put it. Now, on the other hand, examples of academic freedom issues, I will tell you, if your faculty feel that it is an academic freedom issue, let them talk to who they want to about it. And the reason I'm saying that is, the example I'm going to use is our political science people wanted to use a different book. And oftentimes what will be cited, and Chris, you can probably pull this up, you probably have this memorized, that the Department of Education suggests that books are chosen, that students have access to books before the first day of registration. But if you actually read what that says, it says it's a suggestion, it's a guideline. It is not a federal requirement. And that's what our poli-sci faculty were able to go do. They were able to pull it up and go, hey, you're right, that's a guideline. There's a difference between a guideline and a law. The thing of it is, and like Chris said, your institutions might make now, Chris, what we don't, and there's also there's this wishy-washy thing about the difference between a guideline and a policy. So find out, is it a guideline? Is it a policy? And our poli-sci people went, look at this. Now they were able to get a textbook changed because they were willing to be vocal. And the other thing about it is, as learning designers, we try to solve every problem. Okay, we try to solve every single problem on there. With this one, it worked out well that our poli-sci faculty took it forward, and that our poli-sci faculty went through the faculty channels, of shared governance to be able to discuss that. So I'm saying that this is an example of an academic freedom issue, of where something that was being put as a federal requirement. I'm not going to say a law because I don't think anybody thought it was a law, but a federal requirement for financial, was being seen as a federal requirement for financial aid when it was actually a guideline. So Chris, I know you know about this one. So if you have anything, not our particular poli-sci example, but I know you know about this one. So if you have anything else to say about that one.
Yeah, and it is a guidance for financial aid, and it is a preference that all course materials are laid out in advance to inform students, so students are able to make an informed choice. And the reasoning is they want to provide students with informed choice, so that way students can select classes and they know all costs of the classes up front. That's the purpose of the new language, and that is the driving force behind having this content up and wanting to have all of the pieces together. And it is, and in the language is that it's not, how would I put it? It's strongly recommended that it's there. It's just shy of mandatory language. So like that's the reason why it's being presented as such. But yes, it is guidance.
Yeah.
But it is something where it wants that it makes sense that you'd want your students to know what are the true costs of the course laid out before they register for the course. And there's always going to be, and there is, even in the circular, there is acknowledgement that some prices may change for certain courses like lab kits and things like that. You might have changes, you might have a supply shortage or whatever, but we're supposed to do to the best of our ability to provide accurate costs to our students prior to the start of class, prior to when the schedule is being set. So once we push out that schedule, we should have all of the costs associated with those courses out as well.
And that actually ties to the Colorado Online Ready to Teach pooled section. So those courses adopt common materials that are picked by the state discipline group. So really the arena for a conversation around which materials those courses will adopt is in the statewide discipline group. And so that's where that conversation happens. It's adopted, it's revisited, so it's not locked in stone. But that's another example of a standardization that can happen without removing academic freedom, while still helping students to be, more prepared.
Chris, next slide, because we'll be ending soon, so we have to go fast.
Controversial book selections. That never happens. That never happens. No. Bias course content. Yep.
I can talk about that last one. Sometimes as faculty, we tend to stray from the core competencies. We want to present so much information, and our course becomes a stellar archive, an exemplar course. The more we add to it, we lose sight of those like 4 or 5 core competencies. How do we get back to those, So a lot of times it just, requires us going back to revisit those.
And occasionally they also get updated as well. And I've seen that as well, where an update will go through and it's like, oh, by the way.
Yeah. Well, actually, the simple syllabus that we're going to adopt as the CCCS system-wide will automatically load the course competencies now.
Nice.
So when those updates occur, they'll be right there in front of us and the students.
Yeah.
I gave my recommendations already.
I know, we kind of
I'm like, learning designers, don't let academic freedom get in your head. don't let it stop you from your suggestions or your beautiful design. Bring them anyway. And if there's something outside of your learning design that the faculty are having problems with, let them take it to shared governance. Let them go and go through their path.
I
Yeah,
think,
don't let it stay rent free in your head.
yeah. I think also just always going back to the student, is this in the student's best interest? How will this help our students? And really that's should be central to any question around how we're presenting our curriculum or what we're doing as far as academic freedom.
I agree. Definitely, it's always turning conversation back to how does it benefit the student.
Mhm.
And I think the other piece to it is, going to presentations, talking to talking to other folks to sort of feel. I mean, every institution's different. Even within our Colorado Community College system with 13 colleges, every college has a different culture when it comes to academic freedom. As opposed to system, I know every 4 year has its own. 4 years have different cultures compared to the community colleges. Private versus public institutions have different academic freedom pieces. And like we said, if you're a union school versus a non-union school, it's going to be different. So really a lot of it is it's getting to know what your culture is, getting to understand what the flashpoints are. And the other piece is that you may hit some hot button issues and you may get pushback, and it may not be necessarily because of something you did. It may be like that's the other thing, is it may be something because something it's maybe some institutional memory or an institutional need. 15 years ago somebody did this and da 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 da, and like you did something that triggered that institutional memory, and that brought this up. So it's always good to ask why. It's always good to ask questions like, how have you thought about this? Thinking about how you're presenting the different pieces when you're presenting your ideas, when you're presenting, have you thought about doing it this way? I think the other thing that a lot of times whenever you're thinking, especially when it comes to design pieces, I think showing them what it would look like with a different design or a different look might be helpful as well, if you have the time to do a mock-up to show them the difference. Because a lot of times I've noticed in the past is that once they actually can see something and click through it, that can change opinions as well, because sometimes some folks have a hard time visualizing what you're talking about until they actually see it on a screen. And then once they see it on a screen, they're like, oh, this makes sense.
So we'll just we'll wrap it up here. You can go to the last slide. We won't have time for it, but but if we had time, we would have continued talking about what the best academic freedom story and the worst academic freedom story is. And my best is our poli-sci people who, who went through the shared governance process, were able to talk about it, we're confident enough to know the difference between a guideline and a federal mandate. So that's my best. Okay, I think we're done.